Welcome back to the Seven Figure Annuity Sales Podcast. It's Caleb North here, and today we're going to talk about addressing inflation with annuities. This is something that's come up a couple of times in the last couple of weeks. I've had some agents asking some questions about clients that are intrigued by the idea of using an annuity to address future inflation. And I think it's a kind of a relevant topic because of what we've seen inflation-wise over the past few years. But I also think that the last few years are historical anomalies, not necessarily a norm. So I want to talk about it, but really before you get into actually addressing and solving inflation, you want to assess the need for it. And you might wonder, well, Caleb, how would there not be a need? And I guess maybe a better way to think about it is not to suggest that there's not a need for some kind of inflation protection long term, but maybe to pose the idea that the need could, in certain scenarios, actually already be met. And so the first thing that you really want to assess when you're looking at the need for alternative inflation protection is, number one, the income that they're already getting relative to their expenses. So if you're not using a fact finder, you should go to our Annuity Architects training program, get signed up, and start using our fact finder. If you are using a fact finder, but it's not addressing income, you should go to the Architects training program and get signed up and use our fact finder. And if you're using one that does address income, but it's multiple pages long, you should go to Architects and use our fact finder. Here's the deal. Just quick little idea plug about the fact finder. Number one, it has to have all of the necessary information, and income both before and during retirement is absolutely essential to be on a fact finder. Number two, you don't want your fact finder to be this big daunting thing that looks scary. So the more pages you have, the less a client's going to be enthused to actually go through that with you. We use a one-pager, and it gets everything that's absolutely required. And one of the things that it asks is about current income and current expenses, retirement income, and retirement expenses. And here's the deal. What you've got to assess first is, what is our income relative to our expenses? Not just now before retirement, but once we actually get retired, right? Because that's really what we're planning for with these people anyways. Once we retire, how are we going to retire? How are we funding retirement? That's the nature of our conversation. So you want to look at, when they do retire, what is their income relative to their expenses? Now, we always like to look at expenses in two different lights, two different kind of ways you can think about it. And we call it survive and thrive. Okay. So we like to ask, how much do you need in retirement to survive? Just, scrape by, you're paying the bills, you're not hurting for extra, but you don't have a whole lot extra, right? Like, what is the bare minimum need to survive in retirement? And then from there, okay, that's great, but what would you need to actually thrive in retirement? To do the things you want to do, to enjoy your retirement, go take the trip, spoil the grandkids, whatever it is that they enjoy doing. How much do we need per month to do that? And what we're trying to do every time is we're trying to solve for thrive. We want our clients to thrive in their retirement. So we're trying to solve for thrive. And what I'm trying to suggest here is that there can be times when a client comes in super concerned about inflation, really wanting to address inflation. And as you're trying to figure out, do they need it, do they not? When you get into those questions, you can find out if they already have a surplus of income in their retirement that is more than what they need to thrive. Think about how much surplus is that's already there. And factor a normal inflation rate, 2-3%. And see how many years does our current excess already cover. For example, if somebody's getting, let's say they need, $5,000 a month to thrive, but they're getting $5,500. Well, they have 10% more income on a monthly basis than what they need. Well, if you factor in even a relatively, I know it doesn't seem high because of the last few years, but a historically high inflation rate of, call it 3%, you're talking about 3 to 4 years of inflation coverage just by way of the excess income that they already have that's above even the amount that they need to thrive. So you're considering the need for inflation adjustment. The next thing you've got to consider, and again, this is on our fact finder, is large debts being paid off. Okay. And what I consider a large debt that they're making monthly payments to, that is counted in their expenses, is anything that is makes up more than 5% or more of their monthly income. So let's say, for example, they're getting $5,000 a month. If they have any type of debt that they're paying on $250 or more per month, that's that 5% threshold. You're going to want to figure out, when is that paid off? When do we get that? When do we have to stop paying that from an expense standpoint, right? Because that's another layer of future inflation adjustment. If somebody's got $4,500 a month in income and they've got a $1,500 mortgage, 1/3 of their income is going to their mortgage. Well, if that mortgage is paid for in 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is, that's immediately 33% more income that they'll get to retain because the mortgage gets paid off. Cars are the same deal. If somebody's paying $500 a month on a car, that they've got $4,500 a month in income, it's like 11%, I think. I might have done the math horribly wrong there. Point is, if you look at the large debts and when those get paid off, and that kind of target threshold is anything that's going to be 5% or more of their monthly expenses. When do those get paid? Now you can start to factor in the timelines of those being paid and the amount of income that they get to keep as a type of inflation adjustment. The other thing that you have to consider that a lot of people fail to consider is cost of living adjustments on Social Security. Social Security is already going to have some kind of built-in buffer cost of living adjustment in future years. So it's not like they're looking at their $2,500 monthly Social Security and that's all they're ever going to get from Social Security, period, end of story. It's like, no, there can be increase to that as well. So factoring all of that in, do they already have a surplus? When are large expenses or large debts being paid off? Social Security, cost of living adjustments, anything else that's contributing to their retirement income, that if it's an expense that will eventually go away or a stream of income that can increase due to inflation, you've got to consider all of that. And then after considering all of that, you can determine whether or not somebody actually needs an alternative way to address inflation. The last thing that you want to think about, and at least just for you to have in mind and just have conversations with your clients about, is the reality that as people age, barring long-term care, they tend to spend less as time goes on in retirement. So there is a by way of what they do in their retirement, in life, as they age, they tend to do less. The less you do, generally speaking, the less you spend. So if inflation tends to go up, but spending tends to go down, aside from all the other things we've already talked about, there tends to be a natural inflation buffer adjustment, whatever you want to call it, that takes place by way of those normal expenses or the amount that they're tending to spend kind kind of gradually decreasing. So even if things get a little bit more expensive, if they spend a little bit less or they're doing a little bit less, you see some natural offset to that. Once you've considered all that and you've determined, oh yeah, we definitely want to address inflation, there's a couple of ways you can do that using annuities. And the first one is probably the simplest, but it's also, you could make an argument that it's not necessarily the best. But it's simple. And the idea there is you just buy an indexed annuity with an income rider that has some kind of inflation adjustment tied to it, whether it's an increase based on the CPI, whether it's performance-based increase, right? There's a lot of products out there that they'll start you at a lower income, a lower amount of guaranteed income, and then that income can increase each year as a result of, whether it be tied to the CPI or to the performance of the index strategies in the product. So you can actually see that income increase. The logical question there is, how long does it take for that income to get to a point that I could just guarantee from the beginning? In other words, if you look at the products that allow the income to increase, and you look at the starting point of income, kind of that guaranteed baseline, that worst case scenario, guaranteed baseline of income, how much less is that than an alternative product that starts with really high guaranteed income and it's level? It never goes backwards, but it never increases. And you're going to have to just look at the products and see what that discrepancy is. But I can frequently see a 10 to 12-year ramp-up period. In other words, when you look at a lot of these inflation-adjusted products that maybe it's tied to CPI, maybe it's tied to index performance, even looking at hypothetical illustrations, which we know right now look really, really favorable, even looking at those, it's not uncommon to see those taking 10 to 12, sometimes even 15 years for that income to grow to the same threshold that you could start somebody in right away in a high guaranteed income product that's level. So when you're talking with your clients, you need to consider the plan really that they have for their retirement and the typical flow. And you've probably heard people talk about this before, but the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years. It's like generally in retirement, you're going to be doing more earlier on. Then it's going to kind of slow down a little bit. And then eventually you're kind of in that place, possibly long-term care, possibly living in a facility, possibly having home health care or a loved one taking care of you, whatever that looks like. But you get into that point of not really doing a whole lot. Point is, if they are intending to have those go-go years, you can make a very real argument for front-loading the income. And that's a very real thing you have to consider is if it's going to take me 10, 12 years for my increasing income to get up to what I could guarantee today or day one, is it worth that to have that, idea of inflation adjustment? Because really, yeah, I guess from a technical standpoint, you are increasing that income from what you have, but it's still starting out with less than what you could have. And it's taking, a decade plus sometimes to get to what you could have had income wise all along. So you've got to really consider that. And most of the time, it's really not going to make sense for people to take less income today for the sake of that increasing and hoping to get to the same threshold in 10, 12 years of what they could have right away. So consider all that. Then the second way that you can address inflation if it's needed, and this is probably, I think, a little bit better way because it gives a little bit more flexibility to the client, is doing an income ladder. Now, it's going to be a little bit more administratively taxing for you probably because you're dealing with multiple policies being sold, but it gets the client a lot more flexibility in their plan long term, right? Because we can sit here today and we can try and forecast what we think inflation is going to be over the next 2 decades. And at the end of the day, all we're doing is speculating future, results based on past experience. And you and I both know that is not a guarantee. There's no way that we can look at that with certainty and know that's going to happen. So for us to build a plan today that we're trying to address 20 years from now, from an inflation standpoint, that's a really tall order. But by doing an income ladder, you're selling multiple policies that they're designed to trigger, income at various points down the road that create those natural inflation buffers. That can be a nice strategy, but it typically requires you selling more policies. So you're taking more applications, you're doing more paperwork, there's smaller policies per. It takes a little bit more to explain to the client, plan for the client, but a lot of times that can be a better strategy because of the additional flexibility that it gives them. Think of it this way. If you've got $500,000 to work with, and you could put $500,000 into one policy that's inflation adjusted today, or you could put $250 into an income product now, and $150 and another $100 in two other policies that are going to activate at future points to increase the income. It's the same $500,000. You're doing 3 times the work for it, right? So you've got to bear that in mind. But it's most of the time better for the client, because think of it this way. If we can address the income need with $250 now in one of those high paying, guaranteed income, just level income products, and then we have that $150 and that other $100 that's growing, it's able to accumulate in the account value. If they were to pass away, or they were to decide, you know what, no, we've got more than we need. We had a life-changing circumstance occur. We're not doing all the things we thought we were going to do. Whatever it may be, life is life. We can't speculate the future happenings of life. We can hope and we can dream, but we don't know it for sure. So that added layer of flexibility a lot of times creates a better scenario for the client. So income laddering is most of the time going to be your better plan for trying to address inflation over time than those increasing income policies that you sell once. That's my 2 cents. Now, I do think that those two strategies can be good where it's needed. But there's a very practical reason why I started this whole episode off giving you some things to consider and look at as you're planning that to truly determine, is this actually something we need? Now, at the end of the day, you can address a client's need and help them try to see, do they need it, do they not? And clients are still going to make the decisions that they think are best for them, right? So that then leaves you with things you've got to consider in making those sales. But you definitely want to at least educate them, give them all of the information to consider, the realities of retirements, and then in your conversations with them, put together the best plan you can that addresses both their needs and their desires. And there are going to be times when you talk to them about inflation, and especially now, because of the last 3 years we've had of inflation. It's a pretty hot topic. It's a hot button, and it's something very real to consider. The other thing you also have to consider is that there are going to be scenarios where you won't necessarily be able to monetarily solve both inflation and long-term care. There are going to be situations where the funds that people have are limited enough that you have to pick one you're going to solve. And in that scenario, you're really trying to help the client navigate which one are we going to solve for. Do we want to forego the inflation adjustment? No, we're covered for now, and we can adjust budget if we need to, but we also want to make sure we're covered for long-term care if those needs were to arise. All of that comes into play. And so when we talk about doing holistic case design, guys, I hope you can tell, as we say every time, it's rooted in the fact finder. I started it out with questions on the fact finder today that are absolutely essential pieces of information to get to even determine, are you going to be selling inflation protection or not? Do they need it or do they not? So get into the fact finder, use a fact finder, and then put together the best plan you can, the best holistic case design that addresses, like I said, both their needs first and their desires. So I hope that helps you not only kind of see some strategies that you can use for addressing inflation, but also ways that you can determine, is that an essential thing to be planning for with this particular client, or is it already taken care of in another way? Hope this helps you guys, and as always, happy selling.